Welcome. You have found your way to this quiet space at the end of the day. Let yourself settle. Let the weight of the hours behind you begin to fade. Tonight we're going to follow a single winter night in the Alaskan interior, a place where temperatures fall to 60 degrees below zero, where darkness stretches across months, where the sun barely rises above the horizon, if it rises at all. In this environment, sleep is not something that simply happens. It is earned through preparation, through understanding cold, through the careful management of fire and shelter and warmth. The people who live in these places are not adventurers passing through. They are residents. They have chosen to build their lives far from power lines and paved roads. Their cabins sit alone in forests of spruce and birch, sometimes miles from the nearest neighbour. Their methods for surviving the night come from two sources. The first is the wisdom of indigenous peoples who have lived in the Arctic for thousands of years. The second is the simple physics of heat, wood, and insulation. There is no drama in what follows, only the steady rhythm of preparation and rest, the ritual of banking a fire, the layering of blankets, the sounds of a cabin settling into the coldest hours before dawn. So find a comfortable place. Let the story unfold at its own pace. We begin as the light fades. The winter solstice arrives in the Alaskan interior without ceremony. One day the sun traces a low arc across the southern horizon. The next day it barely clears the tree line. Within weeks it stops rising altogether. This marks the beginning of what residents call the Big Quiet. The term describes a state that goes beyond silence. In temperate climates, quiet means the absence of human noise. Cars stop passing, voices fade. But underneath, the natural world continues its small movements. Leaves rustle, insects hum, water flows over stones. In the deep cold of the Alaskan winter, these sounds disappear completely. There are no leaves, no insects, no liquid water. The temperature falls to 40, then 50, then 60 degrees below zero. The air itself seems to thicken and still. What remains is a different kind of sound, sharper, more rhythmic. In the middle of the night, trees crack. The moisture inside the wood freezes and expands. The cellular structure of the trunk cannot accommodate this pressure. The fibers split. The sound is like a gunshot echoing through the forest. Residents learn not to startle at these reports. They are simply the sound of wood failing under the force of cold. When the air temperature drops below 30 degrees below zero, another phenomenon appears. Ice fog. Moisture from wood stoves and human breath freezes the moment it meets the outside air. It does not fall as snow. It hangs suspended as tiny ice crystals. These crystals are called droxtoles. They range from 7 to 50 micrometers in diameter, too small to see individually. But together they create a shimmering haze that settles into valleys and follows the contours of the land. For the cabin resident, ice fog serves as a signal. It means the air has reached its saturation point. It can hold no more moisture. Any additional water vapour will freeze immediately. This is important information. It means ventilation systems must be monitored closely. Exhaust vents must be kept clear. The visual world during this period transforms completely. When the sky is clear, the darkness is not absolute. The moon, when full, reflects off endless miles of snow. The light is blue and cold. It is enough to navigate by, enough to see the outline of trees and the shape of the land. The northern lights appear frequently, green curtains that ripple across the sky, sometimes red, sometimes purple. They provide no warmth, no practical benefit, but they give the darkness a texture, a sense that the night is not empty, but full of movement too distant to affect the human world below. Inside the cabin, the sensory field narrows. The dominant sounds are mechanical, the intake of air through the wood stove's draft, the shifting of ash as a log burns through and collapses, the heavy thud of snow sliding off a metal roof when the interior heat warms it enough to release. These sounds become markers of safety. They indicate that systems are functioning, that the fire is drawing properly, that the cabin is doing its work. Residents learn to distinguish between normal sounds and warnings. A chimney that roars means the fire is too hot. A chimney that makes no sound at all means the fire is dying or the flue is blocked. The creak of logs settling is normal. The crack of ice forming inside a wall is not. The silence outside the cabin is so complete that it affects perception. Small sounds become amplified. The click of a door latch, the scrape of a boot on wood, the pop of sap in burning birch. This is not a comfortable silence. It is a silence that presses in, that makes the interior of the cabin feel smaller and the darkness outside feel vast and patient. For someone new to this environment, the big quiet can be overwhelming. The absence of familiar background noise, the hum of electricity, the distant sound of traffic, the ordinary movements of a populated place creates a disorientation. The mind searches for something to anchor to. It finds only the immediate: breath, heartbeat, the crackle of fire. But for those who have lived through multiple winters, the big quiet becomes a companion. It is reliable. It does not surprise. It asks nothing except that you respect the cold and maintain your systems. The cold itself has a smell, or rather, it removes smell. Frozen air carries no scent. When you step outside at 60 below, there is nothing. No wood smoke, no earth. Just the sharp, clean absence of any odour at all. The cold also has a physical presence. It meets you at the door. It finds any gap in clothing, any exposed skin. Within seconds, moisture on your face begins to freeze, eyelashes stiffen, breath crystallizes and falls. The lethal nature of this cold is not theoretical. Exposed skin will freeze in less than 5 minutes. Frostbite begins almost immediately. Hypothermia follows quickly if shelter is not regained. This is not an environment that tolerates mistakes. At night, the cold reaches its deepest point. The hours between 3 and 5 in the morning are the coldest. This is when the banked fire in the stove is tested, when the cabin's insulation must prove itself, when the sleeper is most vulnerable. The big quiet during these hours is absolute. There is no wind, no movement. The air is too cold to carry convection currents. Everything is still, and in this stillness the cabin sits. A small pocket of warmth, a fragile equilibrium maintained by wood and fire and careful design. The morning, when it comes, does not bring much light. Just a gradual shift from black to deep blue, a suggestion that somewhere beyond the horizon the sun still exists. But that is hours away. For now, there is only the night, the cold, the silence, and inside the work of staying warm. The off-grid cabin is not a new invention. It is the latest iteration of a shelter design that has been refined over thousands of years. Long before modern materials, the Athabaskan and Inupiaq peoples lived in the same environment, the same cold, the same darkness. They survived winters without metal stoves, without synthetic insulation, without any of the tools that contemporary residents rely on. Their success came from understanding a simple principle. The best defense against extreme cold is not to fight it directly. It is to use the earth itself. Traditional winter dwellings were semi-subterranean. The structure was built partially below ground level. A wooden frame was erected, logs or driftwood, depending on what was available. Over this frame, thick layers of sod and earth were piled. The walls might be 2 feet thick. Sometimes 3. This design served multiple purposes. The earth provided mass. Mass stores heat. It also provides insulation. The temperature of the ground, even in winter, is warmer than the air above it. By building down into the earth, residents gained access to this stable thermal baseline. The entrance to these homes was designed with equal care. It was low. Often you had to crawl to enter. This was not for defence. It was for heat retention. Cold air is denser than warm air. It sinks. The low entrance acted as a trap. Cold air would pool in the entrance tunnel. It would not rise into the main living space. The warm air inside, generated by fire and body heat, would remain above. This design feature is called a cold air trap. It requires no moving parts, no maintenance. It functions purely through the physical properties of air at different temperatures. At the highest point of the structure, there was an opening. The Inupiaq called it a kanak. The word means nose. This opening served 2 functions. First, it allowed smoke to escape. The central fire burned seal oil or wood. The smoke rose naturally and exited through the cannock. Second, it allowed fresh air to enter. As smoke left, new air was drawn in through the entrance. This created a constant, gentle circulation. The placement of this vent was critical. Too large, and heat would escape. Too small, and smoke would accumulate. The size and position were determined through generations of trial and error. Inside these homes, the living space was organised around temperature zones. The coldest area was near the entrance. This is where tools were stored, where meat was kept frozen. The warmest area was furthest from the entrance, often on a raised platform. The platform itself was another innovation. By sleeping above the floor level, residents avoided the coldest layer of air. They also created space beneath for storage, for additional insulation. The sleeping platform was covered with reindeer or caribou hides. These hides were not chosen arbitrarily. They represented the best insulating material available in the Arctic. Each hair on a caribou hide is hollow. Inside is a pocket of trapped air. Air is one of the best insulators known. It does not conduct heat well. The dense arrangement of these hollow hairs created a barrier that prevented the sleeper's body heat from escaping into the cold air. Multiple hides were used, one as a mattress, others as blankets. The fur side was placed against the body. This maximised the air trapping effect. Sleep in these homes was communal. Families slept side by side. Body heat from multiple people raised the ambient temperature of the sleeping area. Children slept between adults. Infants were kept closest to the warmest adults. This was not just for warmth, it was for safety. In temperatures that could kill within hours, the collective warmth of the group was a critical survival tool. The fire in the centre of the dwelling was never allowed to go out completely. Someone would wake periodically to add fuel, to ensure the coals remained alive. The consequences of letting the fire die were too severe. The communal nature of these homes also meant that knowledge was passed directly. Children learned by watching, by participating. By the time they were adults, they understood every aspect of maintaining warmth. How to tend a fire, how to layer hides, how to read the signs of cold. The materials used were entirely local. Sod from the tundra, wood from sparse forests or driftwood from rivers, animal hides from hunting, seal oil for fuel. There was no supply chain, no external dependency. This meant that survival required deep knowledge of the landscape, where to find the best sod, which wood burned longest, how to process hides to maintain their insulating properties. The structures themselves were built by the community. The labour was shared. The knowledge was shared. The success of one family depended on the success of all. These homes were not permanent in the way modern buildings are permanent. They required constant maintenance. Sod would settle and need to be replaced. Wooden frames would shift and need reinforcement. But they were reliable. They had been tested across centuries. When European and American settlers arrived in Alaska, they encountered this technology. Some adopted it. Others tried to replicate the homes they had left behind. Those who ignored indigenous methods often did not survive their first winter. The log cabin, as it exists today in the Alaskan interior, is a hybrid. It uses logs instead of sod-covered frames. It uses metal stoves instead of open fires. But the underlying principles remain the same. Thermal mass, insulation, air management. These are not modern concepts. They are ancient ones, proven through the harshest testing ground imaginable. The Siennak is now a chimney. The cold air trap is now a vestibule or airlock entry. The raised sleeping platform is now a loft. The caribou hide is supplemented with wool and down. But the logic is unchanged. The contemporary off-grid resident is not inventing a new way to live in the cold. They are continuing a practice that predates written history. They are using different materials to achieve the same goal. Warmth through the night, safety until morning. The success of these methods is evident. Indigenous peoples thrived in the Arctic for millennia. They raised families. They created art. They developed complex social structures, all while enduring winters that would kill an unprepared person in hours. Their legacy is not romantic, it is practical. It is the knowledge that certain approaches work and others do not, that the cold does not negotiate, that survival requires humility in the face of natural forces far more powerful than any individual. This knowledge has been passed down, not through books, through practice, through the lived experience of the winter after winter, and it continues, in the cabins scattered across the interior, in the rituals of fire management, in the choice of materials, in the way residents prepare for the night. The Ancestral Foundation is not history, it is the present. It is the reason that sleep in the Alaskan winter is possible at all. A log cabin in the Alaskan interior is not a static object. It moves, it breathes, it responds to the environment in ways that a conventional house does not. The movement comes from the wood itself. Wood is hygroscopic. It absorbs moisture from the air when humidity is high. It releases moisture when the air is dry. As it does this, it swells and contracts. Temperature also affects wood. Cold causes it to contract. Heat causes it to expand. In a climate where the temperature can swing from 70 degrees inside to 60 below outside, this movement is constant. The logs that form the walls of the cabin are stacked horizontally. Each log rests on the one below it. Over time, as the wood settles and compresses under its own weight, the entire structure lowers slightly. This is called settling. Settling is expected. It is accounted for in the design. Door frames are built with extra space at the top. Windows are installed with room to shift. If these accommodations are not made, doors will jam and windows will crack as the building moves. The gaps between logs are called chinks. In a newly built cabin, these gaps can be substantial, a quarter inch, sometimes more. Cold air moving through these gaps would make the cabin uninhabitable. The process of sealing these gaps is called chinking. The materials used for chinking have evolved, but the purpose has remained the same. Keep air from moving through the walls. The earliest method used moss. Moss was abundant. It could be gathered from the forest floor and stuffed into the gaps by hand. It provided some insulation. But it had drawbacks. It dried out. It shrank. It was a food source for insects and rodents. It required constant maintenance. Over time, builders began mixing moss with mud or clay. This created a more durable seal. Animal hair was sometimes added to the mixture, hair from horses or cattle. The fibres reinforced the mud, preventing it from cracking as it dried. In coastal areas, oakum was used. Oakum is rope fibre, often hemp, that has been treated with tar. It was originally used to seal the seams of wooden ships. Builders adapted it for cabins. It could be hammered into the gaps between logs and would swell slightly when damp, creating a tighter seal. Frontier settlers sometimes used thin strips of wood as backing. These strips, called slats, were nailed into the gaps. Over them, a layer of mortar was applied. The mortar was a mix of lime, sand and water. This method was more labour-intensive but produced a longer-lasting seal. Modern chinking is synthetic. It is an acrylic or latex compound designed specifically for log homes. It has elasticity. It can stretch and compress as the logs move. It adheres to the wood without cracking. It is applied with a caulking gun or trowel and smoothed into place. The advantage of synthetic chinking is its performance in extreme conditions. At 60 below, traditional mortar would crack and fall out. Synthetic chinking remains flexible. It maintains an airtight seal even as the temperature fluctuates by more than 100 degrees between inside and outside. But chinking is only part of the envelope. The roof must also be sealed. Heat rises. Without proper insulation and sealing in the roof, the cabin will lose warmth faster than the stove can produce it. Traditional roofs used sod, layers of earth piled thick enough to provide insulation. Modern cabins use metal roofing over rigid foam insulation. The foam has a high R value. R value is a measure of thermal resistance. The higher the number, the better the insulation. A typical off-grid cabin in the interior will have an R value of 40 or higher in the roof. This is achieved through multiple layers, rigid foam panels, fiberglass, bats, air gaps. The goal is to prevent heat from escaping upward while also preventing moisture from condensing inside the roof structure. Moisture is a constant challenge. Inside the cabin, activities like cooking and breathing release water vapour into the air. If this moisture reaches a cold surface, it will condense. In extreme cold, it will freeze. Ice forming inside the walls or roof is a serious problem. It can cause wood to rot. It can add weight to the structure. It can create pathways for cold air to enter. To prevent this, the cabin must be ventilated. fresh air must be brought in. Stale, moist air must be expelled. But this exchange must happen without losing the stored heat. Heat recovery ventilators, or HRVs, are designed for this purpose. They bring in fresh air from outside and expel stale air from inside. But before the stale air is expelled, it passes through a heat exchanger. The heat from the outgoing air is transferred to the incoming air. This allows the cabin to maintain air quality without a significant loss of warmth. Not all off-grid cabins have HRVs. They require electricity. They're a modern addition. In traditional cabins, ventilation was simpler. A small vent near the ceiling allowed warm, moist air to escape. A vent near the floor allowed cool, fresh air to enter. The movement was passive, driven by the difference in air density. The floor of the cabin is another critical component of the envelope. Cold radiates up from the frozen ground. Without insulation, the floor would be a constant source of heat loss. Modern floors are built with layers, a vapour barrier to prevent ground moisture from entering, rigid foam insulation to block the cold, plywood subflooring, finished flooring on top. The goal is to create a thermal break between the interior and the ground. In some cabins, the floor is raised. The space beneath is enclosed but unheated. This creates an air gap that provides additional insulation. It also makes it easier to run plumbing and electrical lines without exposing them to the extreme cold. The windows are the weakest point in the envelope. Glass conducts heat much more readily than wood or insulation. A single pane window is nearly useless in extreme cold. Frost will form on the inside, heat will pour out. Double pane windows are better. Triple pane windows are better still. The air or gas trapped between the panes acts as insulation. Argon gas is sometimes used instead of air. It has a lower thermal conductivity. Even with triple pane windows, curtains or shutters are often used at night. Heavy fabric or insulated panels reduce the heat loss further. Every small improvement matters when the temperature differential is 100 degrees or more. The door is another vulnerability. It must open and close. This means it cannot be sealed as tightly as a wall. Weather stripping is applied around the frame. A threshold seal prevents air from entering at the bottom. Many cabins have a vestibule or airlock entry. This is a small enclosed space between the exterior door and the interior door. When you enter, you close the outer door before opening the inner door. This prevents a direct path for cold air to rush into the living space. The envelope of the cabin is not perfect. It cannot be, but it does not need to be. It needs to be good enough. Good enough to allow the stove to maintain a livable temperature. Good enough to prevent ice from forming on the inside walls. Good enough to let the residents sleep without freezing. The cabin breathes, it shifts, it settles, and through all of this movement, it must continue to function. The envelope must flex without failing. The seals must hold. The insulation must remain in place. This is the work of the structure, to stand between the resident and the cold, to create a space where warmth can be generated and held, to make survival possible through the long, dark months. The envelope is not glamorous, it is logs and foam and caulking, but it is the foundation of everything else. Without it, the fire would be meaningless, the bedding would be useless, sleep would be impossible. The living envelope is what allows life to continue in a place designed to resist it. The history of sealing gaps between logs is a history of problem solving. Each generation faced the same challenge. Cold air entering through the walls. Each generation found materials that worked with what was available. The first solutions were the simplest. Moss was everywhere, in the forests, on the tundra. It required no processing. You gathered it by hand and pressed it into the gaps between logs. It compressed easily. It filled the space. But moss had limitations. It was organic. It decomposed. Insects nested in it. Mice pulled it out to use for their own shelters. By the second winter, much of it would be gone. It had to be replaced annually. This was acceptable when labour was abundant and materials were scarce. The work of re-chinking was simply part of the seasonal routine, like gathering firewood, like preserving food. In wetter climates, moss worked reasonably well. It stayed slightly damp. This helped it maintain its shape. But in the dry cold of the interior, it dried out completely. It crumbled. It fell away. The next innovation was to mix moss with mud. Mud acted as a binder. It held the moss in place. It also filled smaller gaps that moss alone could not seal. The mud was often mixed with clay if clay was available. Clay has plasticity. It can be shaped and moulded. When it dries, it hardens. The combination of clay and moss created a chinking material that was more durable than moss alone. Animal hair was sometimes added to the mixture. Horsehair, cattle hair, even human hair in some cases. The fibres acted as reinforcement. They prevented the dried mud from cracking into large pieces. Small cracks were inevitable. But the fibres kept those cracks from spreading. This method required more labour. The mud had to be prepared, mixed to the right consistency, applied carefully, smoothed. But it lasted longer. 2 or 3 years instead of 1. In some regions, builders used a substance called dung. This was the dried manure of herbivores, cattle, horses, bison. It was mixed with straw or grass. The mixture was applied like plaster. Dung-based chinking had an advantage. It was hydrophobic once dried. Water did not penetrate it easily. This made it useful in areas where rain or snowmelt could saturate the walls. It also had some insulating value. The organic matter trapped air. The smell, contrary to expectation, was not a problem. Once fully dried, dung loses its odour. What remains is simply fibrous matter. As sawmills became more common, thin strips of wood became available. These strips, called lath or slats, could be nailed into the gaps between logs. They provided a backing for the chinking material. Over the slats, a layer of mortar was applied. The mortar was a mixture of lime, sand and water. Sometimes cement was added. The mortar hardened into a durable surface. It was weather-resistant. It did not decompose. But mortar had its own weakness. It was rigid. As the logs expanded and contracted, the mortar cracked. These cracks allowed air to pass through. The chinking had to be repaired regularly. The solution to this was to make the mortar slightly more flexible. Additives were mixed in, horsehair again, or straw. These fibres allowed the mortar to flex slightly without cracking. The improvement was modest, but noticeable. By the mid-20th century, synthetic materials began to replace traditional methods. Oakum, which had been used in shipbuilding for centuries, was adapted for log homes. Oakum is hemp fibre soaked in tar. It could be hammered into the gaps between logs. Oakum swells when it absorbs moisture. This swelling helps it seal the gap more tightly. It is also resistant to decay. It does not rot the way moss does. It does not crack the way mortar does. But oakum is labour-intensive to install. It must be hammered into place with a special tool called a caulking iron. The work is slow, and oakum does not provide much insulation. It stops air movement but does not trap heat. The modern era brought latex and acrylic sealants. These materials were developed for the construction industry. They were designed to seal joints in buildings. To prevent air and water infiltration, manufacturers adapted these sealants specifically for log homes. The result is what is now called synthetic chinking. It comes in tubes or buckets. It is applied with a caulking gun or trowel. It adheres to wood. It remains flexible across a wide temperature range. Synthetic chinking can stretch and compress by as much as 50% without losing its seal. This elasticity is critical in climates with extreme temperature swings. At 60 below, the logs contract. At 70 inside, they expand. The chinking must accommodate both states. The material is also waterproof. Rain and snowmelt do not penetrate it. This prevents moisture from entering the wall cavity. Moisture in the walls leads to rot. Rot leads to structural failure. Application of synthetic chinking requires some skill. The surface must be clean. Dust and loose bark must be removed. A backer rod, which is a foam tube, is often inserted into the gap first. This gives the chinking something to adhere to on both sides. It also controls the depth of the seal. The chinking is then applied over the backer rod. It is smoothed with a tool to create a concave surface. This shape sheds water and resists cracking. The material cures over several days. During this time it bonds to the wood. Once cured, synthetic chinking can last for decades. It does not require annual maintenance. It does not attract pests. It performs in temperatures from 60 below to over 100 above. The evolution from moss to synthetic chinking reflects a broader trend. Materials become more specialised, performance improves, labour requirements decrease, but the fundamental task remains unchanged. Seal the gaps, keep the cold out. For the off-grid resident, the quality of the chinking determines the efficiency of the heating system. A poorly chinked cabin will lose heat continuously. The stove will consume more wood. The interior temperature will fluctuate. Sleep will be colder and less restful. A well-chinked cabin holds heat. The stove can maintain a stable temperature with less fuel. The interior remains comfortable. The residents sleep better. Chinking is not visible from inside the cabin once furniture and shelves are in place. It is not decorative. It is hidden. But it is one of the most important elements of the structure. In deep winter, when the temperature drops to its lowest point, the chinking is what stands between the resident and the cold. It is the first line of defence, the barrier that makes warmth possible. The history of chinking is not dramatic, it is a history of incremental improvement, of testing materials, of learning what works and what fails, of passing that knowledge to the next generation. And in the modern cabin, that history is present, in the synthetic sealant between the logs, in the understanding that the envelope must be maintained, that gaps must be sealed, that the cold is patient and will find any weakness. The chinking does its work silently. It does not announce itself. But every night, as the temperature falls, it holds. And that is enough. Heat moves according to physical laws. It flows from warm areas to cold areas. It rises when it is lighter than the surrounding air. It radiates outward from any source. In a cabin, these laws determine where warmth accumulates and where it escapes. Understanding this distribution is essential to surviving the winter night. The wood stove sits on the main floor. It's typically placed near the centre of the living space. This is not arbitrary. A centrally located stove radiates heat in all directions. It warms the entire cabin more evenly than a stove placed against a wall. The stove generates heat through combustion. Wood burns. The chemical energy stored in the wood is released as thermal energy. This heat radiates outward from the metal body of the stove. It also heats the air in direct contact with the stove. Warm air is less dense than cold air. It rises. This rising warm air creates a convection current. Cool air near the floor is drawn toward the stove to replace the rising warm air. This cool air is then heated and rises in turn. The result is a continuous circulation. The stove acts as the engine. Air moves in a loop. Warm air rises. Cool air sinks. The cycle continues as long as the fire burns. In a single-story cabin, this circulation is relatively simple, but most off-grid cabins have a loft. The loft is a second level built above part of the main floor. It is accessed by a ladder or steep stairs. The loft is not a separate room. It is open to the main floor, below. This open design is intentional. It allows warm air to rise into the loft without obstruction. Because warm air rises, the loft becomes the warmest part of the cabin. The temperature difference can be significant. The main floor might be 65 degrees. The loft might be 75. This makes the loft the ideal location for sleeping. The sleeper benefits from the accumulated warmth without needing a separate heat source. The loft also positions the sleeper above the coldest layer of air. Cold air sinks. It pools near the floor. Even with a fire burning, the floor-level air is cooler than the air at head height. By sleeping in the loft, the resident avoids this cold layer entirely. They occupy the thermal zone that requires the least additional insulation. The placement of the bed within the loft also matters. The area directly above the stove is the warmest, but it can be too warm. Uncomfortably so. Most residents position their bed toward the edge of the loft. Close, enough to benefit from the rising heat. Far enough to avoid overheating. The loft typically has a low ceiling, often just 5 or 6 feet of clearance. This is not a design flaw, it is intentional. A low ceiling reduces the volume of air that must be heated. It also keeps the warm air closer to the sleeper. Some lofts have a half wall or railing instead of a full wall on the side facing the main floor. This allows warm air to flow into the loft without restriction. It also allows the resident to see the stove from the bed. This visibility is reassuring. It allows them to monitor the fire without getting up. The main floor remains functional even though it is cooler. During the day, residents spend time there, cooking, eating, working. The temperature is comfortable for activity. Movement generates body heat. Layers of clothing provide additional warmth. But at night, when activity stops, the main floor becomes less comfortable. Body heat production decreases during sleep. The ambient temperature that feels fine during the day feels cold when lying still under blankets. This is why the loft is essential. It is the place where the cabin's warmth is most concentrated, where the least effort is required to stay warm through the night. The walls of the cabin also play a role in heat distribution. The logs have thermal mass. During the day, when the fire is burning actively, the logs absorb heat. They warm slowly. But once warm, they release that heat back into the cabin for hours. This thermal mass smooths out temperature fluctuations. If the fire dies down temporarily, the walls continue to radiate warmth. If the fire burns very hot, the walls absorb the excess heat. The result is a more stable interior temperature. The floor, if properly insulated, also contributes. It prevents the cold from radiating up from the frozen ground. This keeps the main floor habitable. It also reduces the amount of fuel needed to maintain comfort. But the floor will always be cooler than the loft. This is unavoidable. Heat rises, the floor is the lowest point. Even with perfect insulation, it remains the coldest horizontal surface in the cabin. Some residents place rugs or mats on the floor. These provide a small amount of additional insulation. More importantly, they create a psychological barrier. Stepping onto a rug feels warmer than stepping onto bare wood, even if the actual temperature difference is minimal. The windows, as mentioned, are a source of heat loss. Even triple-pane windows cannot insulate as well as a log wall. At night, heavy curtains are drawn over the windows. This creates an air gap between the glass and the interior. The air gap provides additional insulation. In extreme cold, frost will still form on the glass. This is normal. It indicates that the interior humidity is condensing on the coldest surface. As long as the frost is only on the glass and not on the walls or ceiling, it is not a concern. The door is another point of heat loss. Every time it is opened, cold air rushes in. Warm air rushes out. This is why trips outside are minimized after dark. Firewood is brought in before nightfall. Water is stored inside. Anything that might require leaving the cabin is prepared in advance. When the door must be opened, it is done quickly. The exterior door is closed before the interior door is opened if there is a vestibule. If there is no vestibule, the resident moves through quickly and shuts the door firmly. The geography of warmth in the cabin is not uniform. There are warm zones and cool zones. The loft is warm, the area near the stove is warm, the floor is cool, the corners are cool, the spaces near windows are cool. The resident learns this geography. They know where to stand when they are cold, where to sit when they are working, where to sleep when they want to be warm. This knowledge is not written down. It is learned through experience, through spending a winter in the space, through noticing where drafts occur, where the heat lingers, and over time the cabin becomes familiar, not just as a structure, but as a thermal landscape, a map of warmth and cold, a territory that must be navigated every day. The loft is the destination, the warmest point, the place where the day's labour of maintaining the fire and sealing the envelope pays off. At night, when the resident climbs the ladder to the loft, they are moving to higher ground, not just physically, thermally. They are ascending to the zone where sleep is possible, where the cold cannot reach, and there, in the accumulated warmth, they will rest. The wood stove is not furniture, it is not decoration. It is the single most critical piece of equipment in the off-grid cabin. Without it, the interior temperature would match the exterior within hours. The cabin would become uninhabitable, sleep would be impossible, survival would require evacuation. The stove is typically made of cast iron or steel. Cast iron is preferred for its thermal mass. It heats slowly but holds heat longer. Steel heats quickly but cools quickly. Each has advantages depending on the resident's needs. The stove sits on a non-combustible base, usually a layer of brick or metal. This protects the floor from the intense heat radiating downward. It also creates a safety buffer. Embers that fall when the door is opened land on this surface instead of on wood. The stove has a firebox. This is the chamber where the wood burns. The size of the firebox determines how much wood can be loaded at once. A larger firebox allows for longer burns. A smaller firebox requires more frequent loading. The door of the firebox has a latch. The latch must seal tightly. Any gap allows uncontrolled air to enter. Uncontrolled air feeds the fire too much oxygen. The fire burns hotter and faster than intended. Fuel is wasted. Below the firebox is the ash pan. Ash accumulates as wood burns. The ash pan can be removed and emptied. But not all ash is removed. A layer of ash is left in the bottom of the firebox. This layer insulates the bottom of the fire. It also protects the metal from direct contact with burning coals. The stove has an air intake. This is usually a vent near the bottom of the door or beneath the firebox. The intake can be opened or closed. Opening it allows more air to enter. The fire burns hotter. Closing it restricts air. The fire burns slower. Controlling the air intake is the primary method of managing the fire. It is a simple mechanism, a lever or knob, but it requires understanding and attention. The stove is connected to a chimney. The chimney is a vertical pipe that carries smoke out of the cabin. It extends through the roof and rises several feet above the ridgeline. This height is necessary. It creates draft. Draft is the flow of air up the chimney. Hot air rises. As smoke and hot gases rise, they create a low-pressure area at the base of the chimney. Cool air is drawn in through the air intake to replace the rising air. This continuous flow is what sustains the fire. Without adequate draft, the fire will not burn properly. Smoke will spill into the cabin. The fire will smoulder instead of burning cleanly. Creosote will accumulate in the chimney. Creosote is a byproduct of incomplete combustion. It is a black, tar-like substance that coats the inside of the chimney. It is flammable. If it builds up too thickly, it can ignite. A chimney fire is extremely dangerous. It can spread to the cabin structure. To prevent creosote build-up, the fire must burn hot enough. A smouldering fire produces more creosote. A hot fire produces less. But a fire that burns too hot wastes fuel and can damage the stove. The balance is delicate. The resident must learn to maintain a fire that burns cleanly without burning too fast. The stove also has a baffle. This is a metal plate inside the firebox that forces smoke to travel a longer path before exiting. The longer path increases the amount of heat extracted from the smoke. More heat stays in the cabin. Less escapes up the chimney. Some stoves have a catalytic converter. This is a ceramic component that burns smoke and gases at a lower temperature. It increases efficiency. It reduces emissions, but it requires maintenance. The catalyst can become clogged or degraded over time. The body of the stove radiates heat in all directions. The top is often used for cooking. A pot of water sits there continuously. The water humidifies the air. It also provides hot water for washing or drinking. The sides of the stove radiate heat to the surrounding space. Furniture is kept at a safe distance. Anything combustible must be at least 3 feet away. This is not a suggestion. It is a requirement for safety. The stovepipe, the section of chimney that runs through the interior of the cabin, also radiates heat. Some residents install a heat reclaimer on this pipe. A heat reclaimer is a device with fins or tubes that absorbs heat from the pipe and radiates it into the room. It increases the efficiency of the system, but heat reclaimers must be used carefully. If they cool the smoke too much, creosote will form in the chimney. The balance between efficiency and safety must be maintained. The stove requires daily attention. Ash must be managed. The firebox must be cleaned. The glass in the door, if there is one, must be kept clear. Soot accumulates on the glass. It obscures the view of the fire. A clear view allows the resident to monitor the fire without opening the door. The fire itself is never casual. It is not something that happens in the background. It is the central fact of daily life. Every decision about activity, about timing, about sleep, is made in relation to the fire. The fire must be fed. The fire must be monitored. The fire must be banked at night and revived in the morning. This rhythm structures the day. In the morning, the fire is rebuilt from the coals left overnight. Small kindling is added first. Dry thin pieces that catch easily. Paper birch. Bark is ideal. It is oily. It ignites even when damp. It burns hot enough to ignite larger pieces. Once the kindling is burning, larger pieces are added. The fire grows. The stove begins to radiate heat. The cabin warms. The cycle has begun again. During the day, the fire is maintained at a moderate level, enough to keep the cabin comfortable, not so much that fuel is wasted. The resident adds wood as needed. They learn to read the fire, to know when it needs attention. As evening approaches, preparation for the night begins. The firebox is loaded more heavily. Larger pieces, denser wood. The goal is to create a fire that will burn for 6 to 8 hours without attention. This is not a quick process. It requires planning. The right wood must be selected. The right arrangement must be achieved. The air intake must be set correctly. If done well, the fire will burn steadily through the night. The cabin will remain warm. The resident will sleep without waking to tend the fire. If done poorly, the fire will either burn out too quickly or burn too hot. If it burns out, the cabin will grow cold by the early morning hours. If it burns too hot, fuel is wasted and the cabin may become uncomfortably warm. The stove is not automated. There are no thermostats, no timers, no backup systems. It is entirely manual. It requires knowledge and effort. But this manual nature is also an advantage. The resident understands exactly how the system works. They can troubleshoot problems. They can adapt to changing conditions. They are not dependent on technology that might fail. The relationship between the resident and the stove is intimate. They know its quirks. They know how it responds to different types of wood. They know the sounds it makes when it is functioning properly. The slow intake of air through the draft. The crackling of burning wood. The occasional pop of sap. These sounds are comforting. They indicate that the system is working. Silence from the stove is concerning. It might mean the fire has died. It might mean the air intake is blocked. It requires investigation. The stove is also a source of light. In the evening, when the sun has set and the cabin is dark, the glow of the fire provides illumination. It is warm light, orange and flickering. It creates a sense of safety. Modern cabins may have electric lights powered by solar panels or generators, but these are often dimmed or turned off to conserve energy. The stove light is free. It is constant as long as the fire burns. The stove is the heart of the cabin, not metaphorically, functionally. It pumps heat through the space. It sustains life. It makes everything else possible. The bed in the loft, the food stored in the pantry, the water kept liquid, all of these depend on the stove, and the stove depends on the resident, on their knowledge, on their attention, on their willingness to perform the daily liturgy of fire management. This is not a burden. It is a partnership. The resident provides fuel and care. The stove provides warmth and survival, and in the deep cold of the Alaskan winter, this partnership is what allows sleep to happen at all. The difference between a fire that lasts through the night and one that dies at 3 a.m. is a matter of technique. The goal is simple. Load the firebox in a way that allows the fire to burn slowly and steadily for 6 to 8 hours, long enough for a full night of sleep. This is called an extended burn or a long burn. It is not difficult, but it requires understanding how fire consumes wood. Fire needs 3 things: fuel, oxygen, heat. Remove any one of these and the fire goes out. The art of the long burn is controlling oxygen. The process begins with the coal bed. Coals are pieces of wood that have burned past the stage of flame. They glow red or orange. They produce intense heat. They burn much slower than flaming wood. A healthy coal bed is essential. Without it, the new wood added for the night burn will not ignite. Properly, the fire will struggle. It may go out entirely. To create a coal bed, the resident burns the fire hot during the evening. Smaller pieces are used. The fire is allowed to burn freely with the air intake open. The wood burns down to coals. Once a sufficient bed of coals is formed, they are raked forward, toward the front of the firebox, near the air intake. This positioning is important. The incoming air will flow over the coals first. This keeps them hot. Hot coals will ignite the fresh wood loaded behind them. The fresh wood is selected carefully. For a long burn, large pieces are preferred, unsplit rounds if possible. The larger the piece, the longer it takes to burn. A split log has more surface area exposed to oxygen. It burns faster. A round log has less surface area. It burns slower. The wood must also be dry. Green wood contains moisture. Burning green wood wastes energy. The fire must first evaporate the moisture before it can release heat. This cools the fire. It produces more smoke. It creates more creosote. Properly seasoned wood has been dried for at least 1 year, ideally longer. The moisture content is below 20%. When struck together, seasoned pieces make a sharp, hollow sound. Green wood makes a dull thud. The fresh wood is loaded into the back of the firebox. The pieces are packed tightly. They are oriented parallel to the door. This is called an east-west load. The term refers to the direction relative to the stove door. An east-west load minimises the surface area exposed to the air flowing through the firebox. The fire must spread from one log to the next slowly. This extends the burn time. An alternative is a north-south load. The logs are oriented perpendicular to the door. This exposes more surface area. The fire burns faster. A north-south load is used during the day when shorter, hotter burns are desired. For the night, east-west is the standard. Once the wood is loaded, the air intake is adjusted. It is closed, partially, not completely. Closing it completely would starve the fire of oxygen. The fire would smoulder and go out, but closing it most of the way restricts the oxygen flow. The fire burns slower. Finding the correct setting takes practice. Too much air and the fire burns too fast. Too little and the fire dies. The correct setting is just enough to keep the fire burning steadily. Some stoves have markings on the air intake lever: low, medium, high. These are guides. But every stove is different. Every installation is different. The resident must learn their specific stove. The firebox door is closed and latched. The fire is now set for the night. If done correctly, the wood will burn slowly from front to back. The coals will ignite the first log. That log will ignite the next. The process will continue for hours. The resident can verify the setup by observing the chimney from outside. The smoke should be thin and light-coloured. Dark, thick smoke indicates incomplete combustion. The fire is smouldering. The air intake may need to be opened slightly. Inside, the stove should produce a steady, low sound. Not roaring, not silent. A soft, continuous murmur of combustion. The temperature of the stovepipe can also be checked. A magnetic thermometer is often attached to the pipe. The ideal temperature range for nighttime burning is between 300 and 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Below 300, creosote forms. Above 500, the fire is burning too hot. If the temperature is too low, the air intake is opened slightly. If too high, it is closed further. Small adjustments have large effects. The resident makes the adjustment and waits. Checks again in 15 minutes. Adjust if necessary. Once the fire is stable, the resident can retire to the loft. The fire will continue on its own. During the night, the firebox goes through stages. For the first 2 hours, the flames are visible. The wood is burning actively. Heat output is high. The cabin is warm. After 2 hours, the flames diminish. The wood has burned down. The surface is charred. The combustion is occurring deeper within the logs. Heat output decreases slightly, but it remains sufficient. By 4 hours, there are no visible flames, only glowing coals and partially burned logs. The heat output is lower, but the thermal mass of the stove and the cabin walls continues to radiate warmth. The interior temperature remains stable. By 6 hours, the logs are mostly consumed. What remains are large coals and ash. The heat output is at its minimum. This is the coldest point of the night. Typically between 3 and 5 in the morning. If the burn was set correctly, the cabin temperature will have dropped only a few degrees, not enough to wake the sleeper, not enough to cause discomfort. By 8 hours, the coals are still glowing. They are no longer producing significant heat, but they are alive. They can be revived. When the resident wakes in the morning, they descend from the loft. They open the firebox, they rake the coals forward, they add kindling. The kindling ignites from the coals. The fire is reborn. The cycle begins again. The long burn is not automatic. It requires correct wood selection, correct loading, correct air intake setting. It requires understanding the relationship between oxygen and combustion. It requires attention to detail. But once mastered, it becomes routine. The resident performs the steps without thinking. The fire lasts through the night. Sleep is uninterrupted. This is the liturgy of the hearth. not religious, but ritualistic. A series of precise actions performed in a specific order, actions that have been performed by countless others in countless cabins over countless winters. The long burn is ancient knowledge expressed through modern materials. The principle is the same whether the stove is cast iron or stone, whether the fuel is birch or oak. Restrict oxygen, maximize fuel mass, allow the fire to burn at the slowest, sustainable rate, and in doing so create the conditions for warmth, for safety, for sleep. The long burn is not dramatic, it is not exciting, it is simply effective. And in the Alaskan winter, effectiveness is what matters. The fire burns, the cabin stays warm, the resident sleeps. That is the science, that is the art, that is the necessity. Before the resident climbs to the loft for the night, one final step remains. The fire must be banked. Banking is the practice of putting the fire to bed. It is different from simply loading wood and closing the air intake. Banking involves an additional action, covering the coals. The purpose is preservation. The goal is to keep the coals alive through the night with minimal combustion. This allows the fire to be easily rekindled in the morning. It also extends the time the fire can sustain itself without producing significant heat. The technique is simple. After the firebox has been loaded for the night and the fire has been burning for an hour or so, the resident opens the door. Using a metal poker or shovel, they spread a thin layer of ash over the glowing coals. The ash comes from the ash pan or from the edges of the firebox. It is fine and powdery. When spread over the coals, it acts as an insulating blanket. Ash is a poor conductor of heat. It traps the heat within the coals. It also restricts the flow of oxygen to the coals. With less oxygen, the coals burn even more slowly. They smoulder rather than glow brightly. The layer of ash must be thin. Too thick and the coals will be suffocated. They will go out entirely. Too thin and the effect is minimal. The coals will continue to burn at their normal rate. The correct thickness is about 1/4 inch, enough to cover the coals completely, not enough to bury them. After the ash is applied, the firebox door is closed. The air intake is set to its minimum, not fully closed, just barely open, enough to allow a trickle of air, enough to keep the coals alive. The stove settles into its slowest state. The coals beneath the ash continue to burn, but the combustion is minimal. Heat output is very low, just enough to keep the cabin from cooling too quickly. The banked fire can sustain itself for 10 to 12 hours, sometimes longer. As long as the coals remain alive, the fire can be revived without starting from scratch. In the morning, when the resident returns to the stove, they open the door. The firebox appears cold. There are no visible flames, no glowing coals, just ash and charred wood. But beneath the ash, the coals are still alive. The resident uses a poker to gently disturb the ash. Immediately, red embers are revealed. The coals have been waiting. The ash is raked to the side. The coals are raked forward into a small pile. Fresh air reaches them. They begin to glow brighter. Within moments, they are hot enough to ignite kindling. Small sticks are added. Birch bark, dry twigs. The kindling catches. Flames appear. Larger pieces are added. The fire grows. The morning fire building process takes only a few minutes. Because the coals were preserved, no matches needed. No fire starting from cold. The fire never truly died. It was only sleeping. This continuity is important. It saves time. It saves materials. It provides psychological reassurance. The fire is a living thing. It has been tended through the night. It has survived. Banking is a technique that predates modern stoves. It was used in open hearths, in stone fireplaces, in any situation where maintaining embers overnight was critical. The principle is universal. Reduce oxygen. Insulate the heat source. Allow combustion to slow to its minimum sustainable rate. In some cultures, the hearth fire was never allowed to go out. It burned continuously for years, decades. The continuity of the fire represented the continuity of the household. Letting it die was seen as a failure, a bad omen. While modern off-grid residents do not attach such symbolism to the fire, the practical reasons for maintaining it are unchanged. Starting a fire from scratch in a cold cabin is difficult. The firebox is cold. The chimney has no draft. The wood is cold. Everything works against ignition. A banked fire solves these problems. The firebox retains some warmth, the chimney retains some heat. Draught is easier to establish. The fire starts reliably. Banking also extends the usable heat from a single loading. Instead of burning all the wood quickly and then having the cabin cool, the wood burns slowly. The heat is distributed over a longer period. The cabin temperature remains more stable. For the sleeper, this stability is critical. Waking in the middle of the night because the cabin has become too cold disrupts sleep. It requires getting out of bed, descending from the loft, reloading the stove. All of this in the cold and dark. With a properly banked fire, the cabin temperature drops only slightly through the night. Not enough to cause discomfort, not enough to wake the sleeper. The banking process itself takes only a minute or two, but it is a step that cannot be skipped. It is as essential as loading the wood or adjusting the air intake. Some residents develop their own variations. Some prefer to bank earlier in the evening. Others wait until just before sleep. Some use more ash. Others use less. The specific technique matters less than the understanding of the principle. The fire must be slowed, the coals must be preserved, the night must be bridged, and when morning comes, the fire is still there, waiting, ready to be awakened. This is the rhythm of life with a wood stove. The fire is never fully extinguished. It is only banked, allowed to rest, and then revived, day after day, night after night, through the entire winter. The fire continues. The cabin remains warm. Life persists in a place that would otherwise be uninhabitable. Banking the fire is not a grand gesture. It is a small act, a scattering of ash, an adjustment of a lever, but it is these small acts, performed correctly and consistently, that make survival possible. The fire is banked. The cabin is quiet. The resident climbs to the loft. The night can begin. Not all wood stoves are made of cast iron or steel. Some are lined with soapstone. These stoves function differently. They heat more slowly, but they hold heat much longer. Soapstone is a metamorphic rock. It is composed primarily of talc. It has a smooth, soft texture. It can be carved easily, but once installed in a stove, it becomes a permanent part of the structure. The defining characteristic of soapstone is its thermal mass. Thermal mass is the ability of a material to absorb and store heat energy. Soapstone has approximately twice the thermal mass of cast iron. It can absorb a great deal of heat without becoming excessively hot to the touch. When a fire burns in a soapstone-lined stove, the heat radiates into the stone. The stone absorbs this heat. The surface temperature of the stone rises slowly, much more slowly than cast iron or steel. A cast iron stove will reach its operating temperature within 30 minutes of lighting a fire. A soapstone stove may take 2 hours or longer. This slow heating can be frustrating for someone trying to warm a cold cabin quickly. But the advantage appears later. When the fire dies down, the cast iron stove cools rapidly. Within an hour it provides little heat. The soapstone stove continues to radiate warmth for hours, sometimes for an entire day. This extended heat release is called thermal inertia. The stone resists changes in temperature. Once hot, it stays hot. Once cold, it stays cold. This property makes it ideal for maintaining a stable temperature overnight. For the off-grid resident preparing for sleep, a soapstone stove offers a significant advantage. The fire can be allowed to burn down earlier in the evening. The stone will continue to release heat through the night. The cabin temperature remains stable without active combustion. This reduces the amount of attention the fire requires. It also reduces fuel consumption. Less wood is needed to maintain comfort through the night. Some manufacturers claim that a properly fired soapstone stove can radiate heat for up to 30 hours after the last log is added. This claim is technically accurate but misleading. The heat output after 30 hours is minimal, enough to keep the stove warm to the touch, not enough to heat a cabin in extreme cold. A more realistic estimate is that a soapstone stove provides meaningful heat for 12 to 16 hours after the fire dies. This is still substantially longer than a standard cast iron stove. The stone also radiates heat differently. Cast iron radiates intense heat in a directional pattern. The area directly in front of the stove becomes very hot. The areas to the side remain cooler. The heat feels sharp, focused. Soapstone radiates heat more evenly. The entire surface of the stone becomes warm. The heat spreads in all directions. It feels gentler, less intense, more like the warmth of sunlight than the blast of a furnace. This even heat distribution is particularly beneficial in a small cabin. There are fewer hot spots. The temperature throughout the space is more uniform. The installation of soapstone in a stove adds weight. Soapstone is dense. A soapstone-lined stove can weigh several hundred pounds, more than an equivalent cast-iron model. This requires a stronger floor, a more substantial base, but the weight is also part of the thermal advantage. The mass that makes the stove heavy is the same mass that stores heat. The two cannot be separated. Soapstone stoves are more expensive than cast-iron stoves. The material is costly. The fabrication is labour-intensive. Each piece of stone must be cut and fitted precisely. The stove must be assembled carefully to prevent cracking. Despite the cost, many off-grid residents choose soapstone. The fuel savings over years of use offset the initial expense. The reduced maintenance of the fire through the night is worth the investment. There are also aesthetic considerations. Soapstone has a natural beauty. It is often grey or green with subtle veining. The surface develops a patina over time. It darkens slightly. It acquires a soft sheen. Some residents appreciate this. The stove becomes a piece of functional sculpture, a focal point of the cabin's interior, but aesthetics are secondary. The primary reason for choosing soapstone is performance. It works better for the specific demands of off-grid winter living. The stone's thermal properties also affect how the stove is operated. With a cast-iron stove, the fire is managed primarily through air intake adjustment. The resident controls how fast the fire burns by controlling oxygen flow. With a soapstone stove, the thermal mass becomes part of the equation. The resident learns to anticipate. They light a hot fire several hours before they need the heat. The stone absorbs the energy. Later, when the fire burns down, the stone releases that energy. This requires planning. It requires understanding the relationship between fire intensity, time, and heat output. It is more complex than operating a cast-iron stove, but once learned, it becomes intuitive. The soapstone also affects the sleep experience. The heat it provides through the night is steady. There are no sudden temperature drops, no cold periods just before dawn. The cabin remains at a relatively constant temperature from the time the resident goes to bed until they wake. This stability improves sleep quality. The body does not have to respond to changing temperatures. It can remain in a deeper, more restful state. The stone also continues to provide heat in the morning. When the resident wakes, the cabin is still warm. There is no urgent need to rebuild the fire immediately. They can take their time, move slowly. The stone has brought them this comfort. Some soapstone stoves are designed with a flat cooking surface on top. The stone retains heat long enough that food can be cooked hours after the fire has died. A pot of oatmeal can be placed on the stove at night. By morning, it has cooked slowly in the residual heat. This slow cooking capability is a bonus. It saves fuel. It provides hot food without the need to rebuild the fire first thing in the morning. Not all cabins can accommodate a soapstone stove. The floor must be strong enough. The budget must allow for the higher cost. The resident must be willing to learn a different fire management technique. But for those who can make it work, the soapstone stove becomes an essential partner in winter survival. It does not require constant attention. It does not demand frequent feeding. It simply holds heat and releases it slowly, steadily, through the long dark hours. The stone remembers the fire. Long after the flames have died, the memory remains, stored as heat, released as comfort. This is the nature of thermal mass. This is the advantage of soapstone. Not in the moment of burning, but in the hours afterward, in the quiet of the night, in the stillness of the loft. The stone continues its work, unseen, unfelt as a separate presence, but essential. The cabin stays warm, the resident sleeps, the stone remembers. Wood is not a uniform fuel. Different species produce different amounts of heat, burn at different rates, create different amounts of ash and creosote. For the off-grid resident, selecting the right wood is as important as managing the fire itself. The wrong wood wastes effort. It produces less heat. It requires more frequent loading. It fouls the chimney faster. The right wood burns clean. It produces high heat. It sustains the fire through the night. Heat content in wood is measured in BTUs. A BTU, or British Thermal Unit, is the amount of energy required to raise the temperature of 1 pound of water by 1 degree Fahrenheit. The higher the BTU rating, the more heat the wood produces, but BTU ratings are typically given per cord. A cord is a stack of wood measuring 4 feet high, 4 feet wide and 8 feet long. This is a standard unit. It allows for comparison between species. In the Alaskan interior, the most common firewood species are paper birch, white spruce, quaking aspen, and balsam poplar. Each has distinct properties. Paper birch is the preferred fuel. It has a BTU rating ranging from 23.6 to 41 million BTUs per cord, depending on the source and moisture content. This is high. Among the highest of commonly available woods in the region. Paper birch is dense. A cubic foot of dry birch weighs approximately 55 pounds. This density translates directly to heat content. More mass means more stored energy. Birch also burns cleanly. It produces minimal creosote. The fire burns with a steady, bright flame. There is little smoke if the wood is dry. The bark of paper birch is distinctive. It is white and papery. It peels in thin sheets. This bark is impregnated with natural oils. These oils make it highly flammable. Even when damp, birch bark will ignite. It is the best natural kindling available. Residents often collect birch bark separately. It is stored in a dry place. When starting a fire, a few strips of birch bark are placed under the kindling. They catch fire from a single match. They burn hot enough to ignite the kindling within seconds. The wood itself splits easily when frozen. In the cold, moisture within the wood turns to ice. The ice acts as a wedge. A single strike with a maul often splits around cleanly. White spruce is the second choice. It has a lower BTU rating than birch. Approximately 18 to 30 million BTUs per cord. It weighs about 40 pounds per cubic foot when dry. Spruce burns faster than birch. It does not produce as much heat per log, but it has advantages. It is abundant. In many areas, spruce is more readily available than birch. It is also easy to process. The wood is soft. It splits with little effort. Spruce contains resin. This resin aids ignition. Dry spruce catches fire quickly. It produces a bright flame. But the resin also creates more creosote. The chimney must be cleaned more frequently if spruce is the primary fuel. The smell of burning spruce is distinctive. It is sharp, slightly acrid, not unpleasant but noticeable. Some residents find it comforting. It is the smell of winter. Quaking aspen is less desirable. It has a BTU rating of approximately 16 to 28 million per cord. It weighs only 38 pounds per cubic foot. It is light, soft. It splits easily, almost too easily. Aspen burns very quickly. A firebox full of aspen will burn through in half the time of birch. This makes it impractical for overnight burns. It is useful during the day, for quick warming, for cooking, but not for sustained heat. Aspen also produces more ash. The ash must be removed from the firebox more frequently. This is additional work. The one advantage of aspen is that it seasons quickly. Because it is less dense, moisture evaporates faster. Aspen cut in the spring may be ready to burn by fall. Birch requires at least a full year, often two. Balsam poplar is the least desirable of the common species. It has the lowest BTU rating, approximately 15 to 25 million per cord. It weighs only 34 pounds per cubic foot. Poplar is wet. Even after seasoning, it retains significant moisture. Burning wet wood is inefficient. Energy is wasted evaporating water. The fire produces more smoke. The heat output is reduced. Poplar also rots quickly. If cut logs are not stored properly, they will begin to decompose within months. They become soft, punky, useless as fuel. Most residents avoid poplar unless no other option is available. It is a last resort. The importance of seasoning cannot be overstated. Green wood, regardless of species, is poor fuel. Moisture content in freshly cut wood can be 50% or higher. This means that half the weight is water. When green wood is burned, the fire must first evaporate this water. This requires energy that does not contribute to heating the cabin. The fire burns cooler. It produces more smoke. It creates more creosote. Properly seasoned wood has a moisture content below 20%, ideally below 15%. This takes time. The wood must be cut, split and stacked in a location where air can circulate. The sun and wind gradually remove the moisture. The rule of thumb is 1 year of seasoning for most species. 2 years is better. 3 years produces the best results. But this requires planning. Wood being burned this winter was cut at least last winter. Ideally the winter before that. For the off-grid resident, this means maintaining a rotating stockpile. Wood for this year, wood for next year, wood for the year after. Always cutting ahead, always preparing. The wood is stored in covered sheds or under tarps. It is stacked so air can flow between the pieces. The bark side is placed up if possible. This sheds rain and snow. The ends of the logs are left exposed. Moisture evaporates through the end grain. Residents learn to identify seasoned wood by appearance and sound. Seasoned wood has cracks radiating from the centre. The bark may be loose or falling off. The wood is lighter. When two pieces are struck together, they produce a sharp, hollow sound. Green wood makes a dull thud. The colour also changes. Fresh birch is white or cream-coloured inside. Seasoned birch turns slightly yellow or tan. Spruce turns from pale yellow to deeper gold. Splitting the wood increases the surface area exposed to air. This accelerates seasoning. It also makes the wood easier to burn. Split wood ignites faster than rounds. It burns more evenly. The size of the split pieces matters. For kindling, pieces should be no thicker than a finger. For daytime burning, pieces should be wrist thick. For overnight burning, larger pieces or even unsplit. Rounds are used. The resident develops an eye for these sizes. They can split a log and sort the pieces by size without measuring. The work becomes automatic. Firewood processing is one of the most physically demanding tasks of off-grid life. A single winter can require 4 to 6 cords of wood. Each cord represents hundreds of individual pieces. Each piece must be cut, split, stacked, and eventually carried to the cabin. The work is done in stages. In late winter or early spring, trees are selected and felled. In spring, the logs are cut to length. In summer, they are split and stacked. In fall, they are moved closer to the cabin. In winter, they are brought inside in small batches. This cycle repeats every year. There is no break, no season when firewood can be ignored. It is a constant demand. But the work has a rhythm. It is physical, repetitive. For some, it is meditative. The swing of the axe, the crack of splitting wood, the growing pile of stacked logs. There is satisfaction in the tangible result. And when winter arrives, when the temperature drops and the darkness settles, the stacked wood represents security. Each piece is a unit of warmth, a measure of safety, a guarantee that sleep will be warm. The dendrology of heat is not abstract. It is practical knowledge, knowledge that determines whether the night will be comfortable or cold, whether fuel will last through the winter or run short in March. The resident knows their wood. They know birch from spruce by sight, by weight, by smell. They know how each species burns, how long it lasts, what temperature it produces. This knowledge is earned through years of experience, through cold nights when the wrong wood was used, through warm nights when the right wood was chosen. The wood is not just fuel. It is a connection to the forest, to the land, to the cycles of growth and decay. Each piece once drew water from the ground, absorbed sunlight, grew taller. Now it releases that stored energy, sunlight from years past, concentrated in cellulose and lignin, released as heat, as light, as the warmth that makes sleep possible. The fire consumes the wood heats the cabin protects the sleeper. The cycle is complete, and in the morning, the process begins again. Water is essential for drinking, for cooking, for washing, for humidifying the air. In most places, obtaining water is simple. A tap is turned, water flows. In the off-grid Alaskan cabin, there are no taps, no municipal water supply, no wells connected to pressurized systems. Water must be obtained through effort. In summer, this is manageable. Streams flow, rivers run, rain falls. Water is abundant. It can be collected, filtered and stored. In winter, everything freezes. Streams become solid ice, rivers freeze several feet thick, rain becomes snow, all liquid water disappears. The challenge is not finding water. Water is everywhere. It is simply frozen. The challenge is converting it back to liquid form without expending excessive energy. Some cabins have wells. A well is a vertical shaft drilled into the ground until it reaches the water table. In the interior, this can be anywhere from 10 to several hundred feet deep. A well in permafrost is a complex undertaking. Permafrost is ground that remains frozen year-round. It can extend hundreds of feet below the surface. Drilling through permafrost requires specialized equipment. The cost is significant. Even when a well is successfully drilled, keeping it functional in winter is difficult. Water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. When the air temperature is 60 below, any exposed water will freeze within minutes. To prevent freezing, the well must be insulated. The wellhead is enclosed in an insulated structure called a well house. Inside the well house, a heat source is maintained, a small electric heater, a propane heater, or in some cases a light bulb. The heat keeps the interior above freezing. The pipe that carries water from the well to the cabin must also be protected. It is buried below the frost line. In areas of permafrost there is no frost line. The ground never thaws. The pipe must be wrapped in heat tape. Heat tape is an electrical heating element that runs the length of the pipe. It keeps the water inside from freezing. This system requires electricity, either from solar panels, a generator, or a wind turbine. If the power fails, the system freezes. Once frozen, it can take days to thaw. In some cases, the pipes burst. The system must be rebuilt. Because of this risk, many residents do not rely solely on wells. They maintain backup methods. One common method is hauling water. Water is transported from a source to the cabin in containers. In winter, this source is usually a heated community facility, a school, a fire station, a small store. These facilities have pressurized water systems. They allow residents to fill containers. The water is already liquid, no melting required. The resident loads empty containers into a vehicle, drives to the facility, fills the containers, drives back, unloads them into the cabin. The containers are typically 5-gallon jugs, heavy when full, awkward to carry. A family of 2 or 3 people will use approximately 5 to 10 gallons of water per day. This includes drinking, cooking, and minimal washing. More if bathing or laundry is done. 10 gallons weighs 83 pounds. Transporting this amount daily is physically demanding. The work is compounded by cold, the distance, the limited daylight. Some residents reduce water consumption to minimize hauling. Dishes are washed less frequently. Bathing is reduced to sponge baths. Laundry is done only when necessary. Another method is melting snow. Snow is abundant. It covers the ground from October through April. It seems like an unlimited resource. But snow is not dense. Fresh snow is mostly air. It takes approximately 10 to 15 inches of snow to produce 1 inch of water. Melting. Enough snow to meet daily needs requires processing large volumes. The process is simple but slow. Snow is collected in buckets. The buckets are brought inside. The snow is placed in a large pot on the stove. The heat from the stove melts the snow. The water is poured into storage containers. The process repeats. Melting snow consumes fuel. The stove must burn hotter and longer to melt sufficient quantities. This increases firewood consumption. More wood must be cut, split, and hauled. The water produced from snow is also very soft. It lacks minerals. It can taste flat. Some residents add a pinch of salt to improve the taste. Melting ice from a river or lake is more efficient than melting snow. Ice is denser. A 5-gallon bucket of ice yields approximately 4 gallons of water. The same volume of snow yields less than 1 gallon. To harvest ice, the resident travels to a frozen river or lake. They use an ice auger or chainsaw to cut blocks of ice. The blocks are loaded onto a sled. The sled is pulled back to the cabin. The ice is stored outside. It does not need to be kept frozen. It already is frozen. When water is needed, a block is brought inside and placed in a large tub. The warmth of the cabin melts the ice over several hours. This method is labour-intensive. The ice is heavy. The travel to the river can be hazardous. The ice surface may be unstable. There is always a risk of breaking through into the water below. Some residents drill a hole through the lake ice and lower a bucket to draw liquid water from beneath. Lakes do not freeze solid. Several feet of liquid water remain beneath the ice. This water can be collected directly, but the hole freezes quickly. It must be re-drilled each time, and the water drawn from beneath the ice is very cold. Near freezing, it must be warmed before use. All of these methods require time and effort. Water is not convenient. It is a daily task, a constant consideration. The resident learns to conserve. Water used for cooking pasta is saved. It is used to wash dishes. Dishwater is used to water plants or clean floors. Nothing is wasted. Drinking water is stored in covered containers. 5-gallon buckets with lids. Large glass jars. The containers are kept near the stove. The warmth prevents freezing. It also keeps the water at a drinkable temperature. In extreme cold, even water inside the cabin can freeze if it is too far from the heat source. Containers placed near windows or exterior walls may develop a layer of ice overnight. Humidity inside the cabin is also a factor. Cooking, breathing and washing release moisture into the air. In an airtight cabin, this moisture can accumulate. It condenses on cold surfaces. Windows, walls, doors. A pot of water kept on the stove helps regulate humidity. It evaporates slowly. The moisture is absorbed into the air. This prevents the air from becoming too dry. Dry air is uncomfortable. It irritates the throat and sinuses, makes breathing difficult during sleep. But too much humidity is also a problem. Excess moisture condenses and freezes. Ice forms on windows, on walls, inside the roof structure. This ice can cause damage. The balance must be maintained. Enough humidity for comfort. Not so much that condensation becomes a problem. Water in winter is a paradox. It is everywhere. The entire landscape is frozen water, but accessing it requires significant effort. The resident develops routines. Water is hauled on certain days. Snow is melted when the stove is burning hot for other reasons. Ice is collected when travelling near the river for other purposes. These routines become automatic. They are built into the rhythm of winter life, like tending the fire, like bringing in firewood. Water is simply another task, essential, non-negotiable. And at night, when the work is done, when the containers are full, there is a small satisfaction. The water is secured. Tomorrow's needs are met. One less thing to worry about in the darkness. The water sits near the stove, gently warmed, ready for morning coffee, for washing, for the next day's needs. It is a small thing. But in the context of off-grid winter living, small things matter. Each task completed is a step toward security, toward warmth, toward another night of safe sleep. The water is there, the fire is banked, the cabin is sealed, everything is in place, the night can proceed. The human body operates on a rhythm, a biological clock that regulates sleep and wakefulness. This clock is called the circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm is controlled by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a small region in the brain. It responds to light, specifically to the blue wavelengths present in morning sunlight. When light enters the eye, it signals the brain that day has begun. The production of melatonin, a hormone that promotes sleep, is suppressed. The body becomes alert, wakeful. As evening approaches and light fades, melatonin production increases. The body prepares for sleep. This cycle repeats every 24 hours. The system relies on external cues. The most important cue is sunlight. Without it, the circadian rhythm begins to drift. In the Alaskan interior during winter, sunlight is minimal. In the deepest part of winter, the sun may not rise at all. In areas slightly south of the Arctic Circle, the sun rises briefly but provides little light. It skims the horizon. The angle is too low to produce meaningful illumination or warmth. This absence of light disrupts the circadian rhythm. The body does not receive the signal to wake. Melatonin production is not suppressed in the morning. Alertness does not increase. The result is a condition known as circadian phase delay. The body's internal clock shifts later. Residents feel alert late into the night. They struggle to wake in the morning. This delay can be several hours. Studies of people living in polar regions show delays of up to 4 hours compared to summer schedules. Someone who would normally fall asleep at 10 p.m. may not feel tired until 2 a.m. Someone who would wake at 7 a.m. may struggle to wake before 11. This creates a conflict. The demands of survival require activity during limited daylight hours. Firewood must be processed, water must be hauled, maintenance tasks must be completed, but the body resists waking. It wants to sleep longer. Over time, this conflict leads to what is sometimes called polar insomnia. Not insomnia in the traditional sense, not difficulty falling asleep, but difficulty maintaining a regular sleep schedule. The body's rhythm becomes desynchronized from the external demands of life. To combat this, residents use artificial light, specifically light therapy. Light therapy involves exposure to high-intensity light in the morning. The light mimics sunlight. It provides the signal the brain needs to reset the circadian clock. A light therapy box produces light at an intensity of 10,000 lux. This is much brighter than typical indoor lighting, which is usually around 500 lux. The high intensity compensates for the short exposure time. The resident sits in front of the light box for 30 minutes to an hour each morning. The light enters the eyes, the brain responds. Melatonin production is suppressed. The circadian rhythm shifts earlier. The timing of the exposure is critical. It must occur in the morning, ideally within an hour of waking. Light exposure in the evening has the opposite effect. It delays the circadian rhythm further. Some residents use a variation called skeleton photoperiod. This involves 2 one-hour pulses of bright light, one in the morning, one in the evening. The pulses are separated by several hours of dimmer light. This pattern creates an artificial day length. The brain interprets the 2 light pulses as dawn and dusk. The hours between are treated as daytime. The hours of darkness between the evening pulse and the morning pulse are treated as night. Research has shown that skeleton photoperiod can be effective in maintaining circadian rhythm in environments without natural light cycles. It provides the minimum structure needed to keep the internal clock aligned. Not all residents use light therapy. Some adapt to the shifted schedule. They sleep later, they wake later. They adjust their daily tasks to fit the rhythm their body naturally adopts. This approach works if the resident has flexibility, if they do not need to coordinate with others on a schedule, if their survival tasks can be done at any time of day. But for those who must maintain a more conventional schedule, light therapy is often necessary. It is the only way to force the body to align with external demands. The lack of light also affects mood. Sunlight triggers the production of serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter associated with mood regulation. Low serotonin levels are linked to depression. In winter, when sunlight is absent, serotonin production decreases. Many residents report feeling low, unmotivated, sad without clear reason. This is distinct from clinical depression. It is a response to environmental conditions. It is often referred to as seasonal affective disorder. The acronym is SAD. The symptoms are real: fatigue, difficulty concentrating, cravings for carbohydrates, social withdrawal. For some, the symptoms are mild. For others, they are debilitating. Light therapy also helps with SAD. The bright light in the morning increases serotonin production. Mood improves, energy levels rise, the symptoms diminish. Some residents also take vitamin D supplements. Vitamin D is synthesized by the skin in response to UV radiation. In winter, the sun is too low to trigger this synthesis. Levels drop. Low vitamin D is associated with fatigue and mood disturbances. Supplementation can help. It does not replace sunlight, but it addresses one aspect of the deficiency. Diet also plays a role. Foods rich in omega-3 fatty acids support brain function. Salmon, walnuts, flax seeds. These foods are often emphasized in winter diets. The body also craves more calories in winter. This is not imagination. The cold increases metabolic demand. More energy is required to maintain body temperature. Appetite increases. Residents often report intense cravings for dense, high-calorie foods, fats, proteins, starches. These cravings are the body's attempt to meet increased energy needs. Eating more in winter is not indulgence. It is adaptation. The body knows what it needs, but the combination of low light, disrupted circadian rhythm, and increased caloric needs creates a challenge. The resident must consciously manage their internal state. They cannot rely on natural cycles to regulate sleep and wakefulness. They must use artificial cues, light therapy, strict routines, regular meal times, consistent sleep and wake times. These become anchors. They provide the structure the environment does not. Without this structure, the days blur together. Sleep happens at random times. Wakefulness occurs when it is least useful. The resident becomes disconnected from the demands of survival. With structure, a rhythm emerges, not the natural rhythm of sunlight, but a created rhythm. One maintained through discipline and tools, the body adapts. It learns to respond to the artificial light, to the routine, to the predictability. Sleep improves, mood stabilizes, energy becomes more consistent. It is not the same as living in a place with natural light cycles. The absence of sun is felt, but it becomes manageable. The light box glows in the morning. The resident sits before it, coffee in hand, eyes open, letting the light do its work. Outside, the darkness continues, but inside the day has begun. The circadian rhythm resets, the body prepares. Another day in the long winter. The struggle with light is not won, but it is managed. Day by day, morning by morning, and when night comes, the body is ready. The structure is held, sleep arrives on schedule. The light box is turned off. The cabin dims, the loft waits. The rhythm, fragile but functional, continues. The body in extreme cold is a furnace. It burns fuel constantly, not just during activity, but at rest, even during sleep. Maintaining core temperature at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit when the surrounding air is 60 below requires energy. Enormous amounts of energy. This energy comes from food. In temperate climates, the average adult requires approximately 2,000 calories per day. This accounts for basic metabolic function and moderate activity. In the Alaskan interior during winter, caloric needs can double. 3,000 calories, sometimes 4,000. The exact amount depends on body size, activity level, and the amount of time spent outside. This is not a minor increase. It is a fundamental shift in how the body operates. The resident must eat substantially more than they would in a warmer climate. The composition of the diet also changes. Not just the quantity. The types of foods consumed. Fat becomes essential. Fat provides 9 calories per gram. This is more than twice the energy density of carbohydrates or protein, which provide 4 calories per gram. Traditional Arctic diets were extraordinarily high in fat. Seal blubber, whale meat, salmon, caribou. These foods provided the concentrated energy needed to survive in extreme cold. Modern off-grid residents continue this pattern. Butter, cooking oils, fatty cuts of meat, nuts, cheese. These foods appear in nearly every meal. The body metabolizes fat differently in cold environments. Fat is broken down into ketones. Ketones can be used directly by the brain and muscles for energy. The metabolic pathway is efficient. It produces heat as a byproduct. This thermogenic effect is beneficial. The energy released as heat contributes directly to maintaining body temperature. Less fuel is wasted. Protein is also important. Protein provides the building blocks for muscle repair and immune function. Cold stress increases the body's protein requirements. Meat is the primary protein source. Moose, caribou, fish, chicken, beef. The specific type matters less than the availability. Meat is stored frozen outside, the natural freezer of winter. Large game animals are often harvested in fall. A single moose can provide several 100 pounds of meat. This meat sustains a family through the winter. It is a significant source of calories and nutrition. Carbohydrates provide quick energy. They are digested rapidly. Blood sugar rises. The body feels energized. This is useful during periods of intense physical activity, splitting wood, hauling water, shoveling snow. But carbohydrates alone are insufficient. They do not provide the sustained energy needed for long-term cold exposure. They must be combined with fats and proteins. A typical breakfast might include oatmeal cooked with butter and whole milk, eggs fried in bacon fat, toast with jam, coffee with cream. This is not indulgent. It is functional. The body will use every calorie. Lunch is often simple. Soup made with meat and vegetables, bread with cheese, leftovers from dinner. The focus is on caloric density. on foods that are easy to prepare and consume quickly. Dinner is the largest meal. Stew, roasted meat, potatoes, root vegetables. These foods are hearty. They provide bulk and warmth. They satisfy the deep hunger that comes from a day of physical labour in the cold. Snacking is common. Nuts, dried fruit, jerky, cheese. Small amounts of food consumed throughout the day help maintain energy levels. They prevent the blood sugar crashes that lead to fatigue. Hydration is also critical. In cold, dry air, the body loses moisture rapidly. Breathing alone removes significant water. Exhalation produces visible vapour. That vapour is moisture leaving the body. Residents drink water throughout the day. Hot tea, coffee, soup. The warmth is comforting, but the primary purpose is hydration. Dehydration in cold environments is insidious. Thirst response is blunted. The body does not signal the need for water as effectively as it does in heat. By the time thirst is felt, dehydration is already significant. Signs of dehydration include fatigue, headache, and difficulty concentrating. These symptoms are often attributed to other causes: the cold, lack of sleep, overwork. But the root cause is often insufficient fluid intake. Maintaining hydration supports all bodily functions. It keeps blood flowing efficiently. It supports kidney function. It helps regulate body temperature. Vitamin D supplementation becomes necessary in winter. The sun's angle is too low to stimulate vitamin D synthesis in the skin. Even on clear days, UV radiation is insufficient. Vitamin D deficiency manifests as fatigue, bone pain, and weakened immune function. Supplementation is simple, a single daily capsule, but the effect is significant. Some residents also supplement with vitamin C. Fresh fruits and vegetables are scarce in winter. Stored produce loses nutritional value over time. Vitamin C supports immune function. It helps the body resist infections. Fish oil is another common supplement. It provides omega-3 fatty acids. These fats support brain function. They reduce inflammation. They may help mitigate symptoms of seasonal affective disorder. The diet of the off-grid resident is not gourmet. It is not varied. Fresh produce is rare. Meals are repetitive. The same ingredients appear again and again. But the food is fuel. It is approached with this understanding. The goal is not pleasure. Though pleasure can be found, the goal is function. To provide the energy the body demands. Cravings in winter are intense. The body knows what it needs. A craving for fatty foods is not a weakness. It is a signal. The body is requesting concentrated energy. These cravings should be honoured. Ignoring them leads to fatigue, to difficulty maintaining body temperature, to a general decline in function. The resident learns to listen to their body, to distinguish between psychological cravings and physiological needs. In winter, the two often align. Food preparation is done on the wood stove. Most off-grid cabins do not have electric or gas ranges. The stovetop serves as the cooking surface. This limits cooking methods: boiling, frying, simmering. Baking is possible in some stoves with oven compartments, but it requires careful temperature management. The simplicity is not a limitation. It is a return to older methods that require attention and skill. The resident learns to judge temperature by the heat radiating from the stove, to know when water is about to boil by the sound, to time cooking by observation rather than timers. Meals are often one-pot affairs: stew, chili, soup, everything cooked together in a single large pot. This minimises cleanup. It also conserves heat. The pot sits on the stove for hours, the contents stay warm, leftovers are stored outside, the cold is a natural refrigerator. Food does not spoil, it freezes. When needed, it is brought inside and reheated. This system is efficient. It uses the environment as a tool. It minimises waste. It simplifies logistics. Eating becomes a ritual, a pause in the day's labour, a time to sit, to warm the hands on a hot mug, to refuel the body. There is satisfaction in this. The food is simple, but it is earned. Every meal represents effort. Wood was cut to heat the stove. Water was hauled to cook the food. The meat was hunted or purchased with money earned through work. Nothing is taken for granted. Nothing is wasted. And at night, After the last meal, the body is fueled, ready for sleep. The calories consumed during the day will sustain metabolic function through the night. They will keep the internal furnace burning. The resident climbs to the loft. Their stomach is full. Their body is warm from the inside. The fire in the stove provides external warmth. The fat and protein in their system provides internal warmth. Both are necessary. Together they make sleep possible. The body settles. The metabolism slows but continues. Heat is generated. Temperature is maintained. The night passes. And in the morning, hunger returns. The cycle begins again. Food, warmth, work, rest. The rhythm of winter survival. The sleeping loft is warm. Warmer than the main floor. But it is not enough. Even in a well-heated cabin, the air temperature in the loft may be only 70 degrees. This is comfortable for someone who is active, moving, generating body heat through muscle activity. But during sleep, metabolic rate decreases. Body heat production drops. 70 degrees becomes too cold. The sleeper would wake, shivering, uncomfortable. The solution is bedding. Multiple layers of insulating material that trap the sleeper's body heat. That create a microclimate between the body and the ambient air. This microclimate can be 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the surrounding air, warm enough for deep, restful sleep. The construction of this microclimate follows principles similar to the cabin itself. Layering, insulation, air trapping. Each layer serves a specific function. The foundation is the mattress. In most off-grid cabins, the mattress is not a modern foam or spring construction. Those materials are expensive. They are difficult to transport. They degrade in extreme conditions. Instead, the mattress is often a wool-filled pad. Wool is compressed into a thick mat. The mat is covered with heavy cotton or canvas. The result is a firm, insulating base. Wool has unique properties. Each fibre is crimped. The crimps create spaces that trap air. Air is the insulator. Wool fibres also have a natural coating of lanolin. Lanolin is water-resistant. It prevents moisture from condensing within the wool. A wool mattress remains warm even if it becomes slightly damp. This is critical. The sleeper's body releases moisture during the night. Perspiration, breath. If this moisture is trapped in the bedding, it can create a cold, clammy environment. Wool absorbs moisture without feeling wet. It continues to insulate, and over time, the moisture evaporates back into the air. Some residents use caribou or reindeer hides as a mattress base. The hide is placed fur side up. The sleeper lies directly on the fur. Caribou fur is extraordinarily effective. Each hair is hollow. The hollow core contains trapped air. The density of the hairs prevents air from circulating. Heat cannot escape through convection. The hairs also provide cushioning. They compress under the body's weight. They conform to the sleeper's shape. The contact is soft, comfortable. Traditional Arctic peoples used multiple hides, one as a mattress, others as blankets. The entire sleeping system was constructed from caribou. Modern residents often combine traditional and contemporary materials. A wool mattress with caribou hides on top, or a foam pad with wool blankets. The specific combination matters less than the principle. Insulation from below, trapping heat from above. The first layer over the mattress is usually a sheet. Flannel is preferred. Flannel is a brushed cotton fabric. The brushing creates a fuzzy surface. The fuzz traps tiny pockets of air against the skin. This layer is not primarily for insulation. It is for comfort. Smooth cotton or linen feels cold to the touch. Flannel feels warm. The psychological effect is significant. Warm bedding is inviting. It encourages rest. Over the sheet, the thermal layers begin. The first is typically a wool blanket. Wool blankets used in off-grid cabins are heavy, 3 to 5 pounds, sometimes more. The weight is important. A heavy blanket conforms to the body. It eliminates air gaps. Air gaps allow heat to escape. The blanket must be in contact with the body to be effective. Wool is chosen for the same reasons it is used in the mattress. It insulates even when damp. It is durable. It does not degrade quickly. Some wool blankets are woven tightly. Others have a looser weave. The loose weave traps more air. It provides more loft, but it is also more fragile. Residents often have several wool blankets. They add or remove them depending on the temperature. On the coldest nights, 3 or 4 blankets may be layered. The final layer is usually a down comforter. Down is the soft, fluffy undercoating of waterfowl, geese, ducks. It is the most efficient natural insulator. Down fibres branch and interlock. They create millions of tiny air pockets. These pockets prevent air circulation. Heat is trapped. The efficiency of down is measured by fill power. Fill power indicates how much space 1 ounce of down occupies. Higher fill power means more loft. More loft means better insulation. A down comforter for extreme cold typically has a fill power of 600 or higher. The comforter is thick, puffy. When laid over the sleeper, it creates a substantial layer. Down has one critical weakness: moisture. If down becomes wet, it clumps. The structure collapses. The air pockets are lost. Insulation is destroyed. For this reason, down must be protected. The comforter is covered with a tightly woven fabric, often treated to be water resistant. The cover prevents moisture from the sleeper's body from reaching the down. Even with protection, down comforters must be aired regularly, hung outside on cold, dry days. The moisture that does accumulate evaporates. The down regains its loft. Some residents prefer synthetic insulation instead of down. Synthetic fibres do not clump when wet. They continue to insulate, but they are less efficient than down. More bulk is required to achieve the same warmth. The choice depends on personal preference and availability. Both systems work if used correctly. The sleeper enters the bed wearing layers: thermal underwear, wool socks, sometimes a wool hat. These layers provide additional insulation. They keep heat close to the skin. Sleeping fully clothed is common. It may seem uncomfortable, but in extreme cold, it is practical. If the fire fails during the night, the clothing provides a critical buffer. It buys time. The head is a major source of heat loss. Blood vessels near the surface of the scalp radiate heat. A wool hat reduces this loss significantly. Some residents resist wearing a hat to bed. It feels restrictive. But after a few cold nights, the resistance fades. The warmth is worth the minor discomfort. The bedding system, once constructed, creates a cocoon. The sleeper is surrounded by insulation. Above, below, on all sides. Inside this cocoon, the temperature stabilizes. Body heat is captured. It has nowhere to go. The space warms to a comfortable level. The warmth is gradual. It takes 10 to 15 minutes after entering the bed for the full effect to develop. The body warms the air in the layers. The air warms the bedding. The bedding reflects the warmth back to the body. This feedback loop is what makes sleep possible. Without it, the body would lose heat faster than it could produce it. Sleep would be interrupted. Survival would be compromised. The architecture of bedding is not complex, but it is precise. Each layer matters. Each material is chosen for specific properties. Remove one layer, and the system is weakened. The sleeper becomes cold. Sleep is disrupted. Maintain all layers, and the system is robust. The sleeper is warm, safe, protected. The bedding is more than comfort. It is survival technology, refined over generations, tested in the harshest conditions. It does its work silently. The sleeper is often unaware of the complexity beneath them. They simply feel warm, comfortable, able to rest. And that is enough. The layers hold. The warmth remains. The night continues. Sleep is possible, not despite the cold, but because the cold has been accounted for, planned for, managed through materials and design. The resident sleeps. The bedding functions. The cabin holds. All is as it should be. The caribou is built for cold. Every aspect of its biology is adapted to survive in the Arctic. The fur is the most visible of these adaptations. Caribou fur is unlike the fur of most mammals. Each individual hair is hollow, completely hollow, from base to tip. This hollow structure is not an accident. It is the result of millions of years of evolution. The hollow core serves a specific purpose. It traps air. Air, when motionless, is an excellent insulator. It has very low thermal conductivity. Heat does not pass through it easily. The challenge is keeping the air motionless. If air can circulate, it carries heat away through convection. Warm air rises, cool air sinks. The movement transfers heat from the warm body to the cold environment. The caribou's hollow hairs prevent this circulation. Each hair is a sealed chamber. The air inside cannot move. It remains trapped. It insulates the hair, and the combined effect of millions of insulated hairs creates a barrier that heat cannot easily penetrate. The density of the fur is also critical. Caribou fur is extremely dense. There are thousands of hairs per square inch. The hairs are packed so tightly that air cannot flow between them. This density creates a still layer of air at the skin surface. This layer is warmed by the caribou's body. It remains warm because it cannot escape. The outer layer of fur prevents wind from reaching the skin. The inner layer prevents the warm air from rising away. The result is a thermal barrier that allows caribou to survive in temperatures that would kill most mammals. They graze in open tundra at 40 below. They rest in snowbanks at 60 below. Their core body temperature remains stable. Humans have recognized the value of caribou fur for thousands of years. It is the best natural insulation available in the Arctic. Traditional Arctic peoples used caribou hides for clothing, for bedding, for tent coverings. Every part of the animal was used, but the hide was especially precious. A caribou hide, properly prepared, retains all the insulating properties of the living fur. The hollow hairs remain intact. The density remains unchanged. The material functions just as it did on the animal. Preparing a hide is labour-intensive. The hide must be removed carefully. The fat and tissue must be scraped away. The hide must be stretched and dried. If done incorrectly, the hide becomes stiff, brittle, useless. When done correctly, the hide is soft, flexible. It can be sewn into garments. It can be used as a sleeping pad. It can last for years with proper care. Modern off-grid residents use caribou hides primarily for sleeping. The hide is placed on the bed, fur side up. The sleeper lies directly on the fur. The effect is immediate. The fur compresses slightly under the body's weight, but it does not flatten completely. The hollow hairs retain some structure. They continue to trap air. The sleeper's body heat is captured by this layer of air. It cannot escape downward. The hide prevents it. The warmth builds. Within minutes, the contact area is noticeably warm. This warmth is not generated by the hide. The hide has no internal heat source. The warmth comes from the sleeper's own body. The hide simply prevents it from escaping. This is passive insulation. It requires no energy input, no maintenance. It functions continuously as long as the hide remains intact. The underside of the hide, the skin side, is placed against the mattress. The skin itself is not a significant insulator, but it is durable. It protects the fur from wear. It provides a stable base. Some residents debate whether the fur should face up or down. If the fur faces down, it insulates the sleeper from the cold mattress. If the fur faces up, it provides direct warmth to the body. Both approaches work, but most residents prefer fur side up. The sensation is more comfortable, and the layer of wool or foam beneath the hide provides sufficient insulation from below. Caribou hides are expensive when purchased. A single hide can cost several $100s, but they are often obtained through hunting, or traded, or inherited. A well-maintained hide can last decades. It is an investment, a piece of equipment that continues to function year after year. The hide requires minimal care. It should be aired occasionally, shaken to remove dust, stored in a dry place during summer, protected from moths and other insects. If the hide becomes damp, it should be dried slowly, not near direct heat. Heat can damage the hairs, make them brittle. The hide should be hung in a cool, dry place, allowed to dry naturally. The hollow structure of the hair is fragile. If crushed completely, it does not recover. The hair collapses. Insulation is reduced. This is why the hide should not be compressed for long periods during storage. During use, the weight of the sleeper does compress the fur, but this compression is temporary. When the sleeper rises, the hairs spring back. The structure is restored. The physics of caribou. Fur is simple. Hollow hairs trap air. Dense arrangement prevents air circulation. The result is effective insulation, but simple does not mean inferior. Caribou fur outperforms most synthetic insulations. It is lighter, more compressible, more durable. Modern materials can achieve similar insulation values, but they require complex manufacturing, chemical treatments, petroleum-based inputs. Caribou fur is natural, renewable. It requires no industrial process. The caribou grows it, the hide is harvested, the fur is ready to use. This simplicity is part of its appeal. In a life defined by self-sufficiency, materials that require no external inputs are valuable. The caribou fur does its job without batteries, without fuel, without replacement parts. It simply is, and it works. The resident sleeping on a caribou hide is connected to a tradition that spans millennia. The same material that kept their ancestors warm in the sod houses now keeps them warm in log cabins. The principle has not changed. The material has not changed. Only the context has shifted. But the function remains, the warmth remains. The simple, elegant solution to the problem of sleeping in extreme cold. The caribou's adaptation has become humanity's tool. The hollow hairs continue their work, trapping air, preventing heat loss, making survival possible. The resident sleeps, the hide insulates, the physics proceeds without interruption, and in the morning, the hide is still there, still functional, ready for another night. This is the value of caribou fur, not in complexity, in reliability, in performance that does not degrade, in effectiveness that does not require explanation. The hollow hairs know their work. They have known it for millions of years, and they continue, night after night, winter after winter, silent, effective, essential. Before climbing to the loft, one final task remains: the night watch. This is not a formal requirement. There is no regulation that demands it, but most experienced off-grid residents perform some version of this ritual. The consequences of skipping it can be severe. The night watch is a safety inspection, a verification that all systems are functioning correctly, that the cabin will remain safe through the hours of sleep. It begins inside. The resident checks the stove. The firebox door is latched properly. The air intake is set to the correct position. The stovepipe temperature is within the safe range. A magnetic thermometer attached to the pipe provides this information. The reading should be between 300 and 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Below 300, creosote accumulates. Above 500, the risk of chimney fire increases. If the temperature is outside this range, adjustments are made. The air intake is opened or closed. The fire is allowed to stabilize. The temperature is checked again. The floor around the stove is inspected. No wood scraps, no paper, no flammable materials within the safety zone. Embers can fall when the door is opened. Sparks can escape. The area must be clear. The pot of water on the stove is checked. It should be at least half full. The water humidifies the air. It also serves as a thermal buffer. If the fire burns hotter than expected, the water absorbs excess heat. It prevents the stove from overheating. The carbon monoxide detector is verified. The small LED light should be blinking. This indicates the battery is functional. The sensor is active. Carbon monoxide is odorless, colourless, undetectable by human senses. It is produced whenever combustion occurs. In a properly functioning stove with adequate ventilation, carbon monoxide is vented outside through the chimney. But if the chimney is blocked, carbon monoxide can accumulate inside the cabin. It displaces oxygen. In high concentrations, it is lethal. The detector provides the only warning. The detector is tested monthly. A button is pressed. An alarm sounds. If the alarm does not sound, the battery is replaced immediately. There is no compromise on this point. Next, the resident moves to the door. They dress for the cold. Heavy coat, insulated boots, gloves, hat. The exterior inspection requires stepping outside. The door opens. Cold air rushes in. The temperature difference is shocking. 70 degrees to 60 below. 130-degree differential. The cold is a physical force. It presses against exposed skin, the face, the eyes. Moisture in the nostrils begins to freeze. Breath crystallizes and falls. The resident moves quickly. They are not outside for long, 2 minutes, perhaps 3. But even this brief exposure is dangerous without proper clothing. The first checkpoint is the air intake vent. This is a pipe that brings fresh air into the cabin. It is located low near the foundation. In deep snow, it can become blocked. Snow drifts against the cabin walls. It accumulates. If the drift covers the intake vent, fresh air cannot enter. The stove will begin to pull air from inside the cabin. This creates negative pressure. Negative pressure can cause backdrafting. Smoke that should exit through the chimney is pulled back into the cabin. The interior fills with smoke. Carbon monoxide levels rise. The resident clears any snow from around the intake vent, used as a gloved hand, a small shovel if necessary. The vent must remain open. Next, the chimney is inspected. The resident walks around the cabin to get a clear view of the chimney cap. They carry a flashlight. The beam is directed upward. Smoke should be visible, thin, light-coloured, rising steadily. This indicates proper combustion and good draft. If the smoke is thick and dark, combustion is incomplete. The fire is smouldering. Creosote is forming. The air intake may need adjustment, or the wood may be too wet. If there is no smoke at all, the fire may have died. This is unlikely if the night burn was set correctly, but it can happen. The resident would need to go back inside and rebuild the fire. The chimney cap itself is examined. In extreme cold, moisture in the smoke can freeze on the metal cap. This creates a build-up of ice mixed with soot, a black, crusty substance. If the build-up is severe, it can restrict the chimney opening. This reduces draft. Smoke does not vent properly. The fire struggles. Small amounts of build-up are normal. They do not affect function, but significant accumulation must be addressed. The resident may use a long pole to knock the ice free, or they may allow the fire to burn hotter for a period. The heat melts the ice. It falls away. The exterior walls are checked for frost. In a well-insulated cabin, the exterior walls should be cold, nearly the same temperature as the outside air. This indicates that heat is not escaping through the walls. If the walls are warm to the touch, insulation has failed. Heat is leaking. Fuel is being wasted. The cabin will be difficult to keep warm. Frost on the interior walls is also a concern. It indicates that moisture is condensing and freezing. This suggests inadequate ventilation or excessive humidity. Steps must be taken to reduce moisture sources or improve air exchange. The windows are checked. Snow should not be piled against them. Snow is an insulator, but against a window it can create pressure. It can also melt slightly from interior heat. The water can seep into the window frame. When it refreezes, it expands. This can crack the frame or break the seal. Any snow against the windows is cleared, pushed back from the foundation. The windows must remain free. The final check is the stovepipe where it exits the roof. The pipe should be vertical, not leaning, not showing signs of stress. Ice accumulation on the roof can add weight to the chimney. This can cause it to shift. If the pipe has moved, it must be stabilised. This is not a task for the middle of the night, but it is noted. It will be addressed in daylight. The exterior inspection is complete. The resident returns to the door, opens it, steps inside, closes it quickly behind them. The warmth of the cabin is overwhelming after even a few minutes outside. The skin tingles. The lungs ache from breathing cold air. The transition is disorienting. The resident removes the outer layers, hangs them near the door, checks their fingers and toes. Any numbness is addressed immediately. Frostbite can occur quickly. Back inside, the final interior check is performed. The fire is observed through the glass door of the stove. Flames should be visible, low, steady. The wood should be burning evenly. The cabin temperature is noted. A thermometer on the wall provides the reading. If the temperature has dropped since the fire was banked, adjustments may be needed. More wood might be added. The air intake might be opened slightly. But if all is well, the cabin is stable. The systems are functioning. The night can proceed safely. The night watch is complete. It has taken perhaps 10 minutes. But those 10 minutes are critical. They ensure that the resident will not wake to smoke filling the cabin, that carbon monoxide will not accumulate, that the fire will not die and leave them in a freezing cabin by morning. The night watch is a ritual born of necessity. It is performed by those who understand that small oversights in extreme environments have large consequences. A blocked vent, an unnoticed temperature drop, a chimney cap choked with ice. Any of these can turn a safe night into a dangerous one. The resident who performs the night watch is not paranoid. They are experienced. They have learned, perhaps through close calls, that vigilance is the price of safety. And so they check, every night. Without fail, the stove is safe, the vents are clear, the chimney is drawing, the carbon monoxide detector is functional, the cabin is sealed, everything is in order. The resident can now climb to the loft. They can settle into the bedding. They can allow themselves to sleep. The systems will hold, the fire will burn, the night will pass without incident. Because the night watch was performed, because the checks were made, because the small tasks were not skipped. The ladder to the loft is climbed, the blankets are pulled back, the resident lies down. Outside the cold continues, the darkness continues, but inside all is secure. The night watch has done its work. Sleep can begin.